So we have Joe Malarkey here today, head of Enterprise Microsoft Security. I can't even say your title. It's got so many verbs in it and nouns.
Modern Workplace Security Architect.
And what we're talking today about, we've been having a lot of discussions with clients around Microsoft Copilot, the impact of that. Obviously, everybody's focused on AI right now. What are the implications? But there's been some really interesting things happen within our user base that has prompted us to think a little bit more about this. And so we're naturally going to be talking about DLP, Microsoft's security stack, and I think we should talk a little bit about, Purview and difference between E5 license and E3. There's a lot of general questions about it, but they all seem to be ground center getting kicked off. A lot of security initiatives around the concerns around Copilot.
Yeah. So all of the security concerns aren't really new ones.
Right.
They're things that we should have all been doing. Companies all over the Microsoft landscape should have been doing all these things earlier. One of the huge things that people are worried about, especially when it comes to Copilot, is the fact that if I were to license somebody with a Copilot for 365, which is the version of Copilot, Microsoft's AI, that can work inside of the tenant, I have just given Copilot access to everything that user has access to. Now, that doesn't sound too bad right off the bat, but imagine a company, an imaginary company that has accidentally, through some legacy permission structure, given a user access to, let's say, the entire list of W-2s for the whole company.
Are we talking about our company?
We're not talking about our company, an imaginary company. So they don't know, the user doesn't know they have access to this. But if that user were to form a prompt that included a question that mentioned W-2s, I'd like to know, the W-2s, the W-2 structure, does ours look like other companies? Maybe they're thinking something completely different. They're not interested in seeing the W-2s, but all of a sudden on their screen, from the prompt, comes all of the W-2s for the whole company because, oops, they had access to it. They didn't even know. And right now, you cannot separate Copilot for Microsoft 365's access from the user's access. So that's just one thing.
Interesting.
Yeah. So, but in general,
so now identity and access management becomes extremely important because at least before, unless they were a hacker inside, they wouldn't even know what they had access to.
That brings up a great point. So not only can the user accidentally unsurface things that they shouldn't have access to, now they're aware of it, but yes, what if they're successfully attacked, even temporarily? The first thing that an attacker used to do would be maybe add an authentication method so they can continue their attack for a little bit longer, look at their email. But now one of the first things they might do is, does this user have Copilot? And if they do, oh boy, now we're just going to ask Copilot stuff that.
Thought of that.
Yeah, acting as that user. Now, if the attacker is that user, even for an hour, imagine what Copilot can find stuff in minutes.
So now hackers essentially have an embedded wizard that they can access that tells them everything that they'd have to discover manually otherwise.
Exactly. It significantly.
Okay. Now I understand why all the concern.
Yeah. So the concern's not just for users that have access to things they shouldn't have access to. Yes, of course, that's a huge concern. Yeah. But you have the attacker concern. So Microsoft now, when they're, if you look at their documentation, for instance, for how to prepare for Copilot for Microsoft 365, they list through a half a dozen or so steps that when you glance through them, you're like, this doesn't actually have anything to do with Copilot. This is just, are you secure? Have you secured your authentication, your MFA? All these things. So, that's when you first read through it, you're wondering why they're concerned about this, but that's why, because now, yes, you've given an attacker a supercharged version of access that, they didn't have.
They don't even have to be a good hacker. They can if Copilot's there, they just ask and
it's over.
They're going to use their Copilot address. Can you charge the hacker back for use of somebody's Copilot?
You cannot do that, no. It'd be nice.
So what are the things that it's uncovering? What are, you're talking to a lot of our clients about Copilot, what are some examples of things that they've kind of brought up to you and that engaged you on?
So yeah, the main concern is with the permissions, the overly permissive structure at most companies, the accidental permissions. So the first question is, well, we're going to enable Copilot. What can we do? We have all these teams and SharePoint sites that we really don't know what the permissions are. We're having all the owners go through and take a look at stuff. What should we do? And there's a few things you can do, besides getting in a time machine, going back a couple of years and getting your permission structure straightened out. What can you do? And, there's things like removing a SharePoint site's information from being indexed, because how does Copilot find something that a user doesn't know they've had access to, doesn't normally access?
Yeah.
Well, Copilot would go through the index of sites. This now is under something called Microsoft Semantic Index. They would go through that and look for things that have been indexed on that topic, and then they would access those. So if you remove a site from the index, which you can do with a simple check or removing a check, that will save you a little bit. So number one, where are the crown jewels?
Yeah.
Where's the important information? Let's go there first, and if we can't figure out who should have access and who shouldn't have access, let's remove that from the index, and that will save.
I see.
Yeah, anyone who hasn't accessed it in a while, Copilot won't be able to see it. Now, if people do access it, number one, they already know they have access to it, but it will actually be part of their own private index, and you really can't remove that. But for people who accidentally have access to stuff, it's unlikely they've accessed it. So that's the first thing. Anyone can do this,
which is good practice anyway.
Yeah, I mean, the second you unindex it, you've unindexed it for everybody. So now nobody can discover it, and that's a problem.
Yeah,
but for the
visibility to it from a up-down standpoint, or is that
you just can't find it if you don't know it's there.
I see.
It's just the index. Okay. So all the access is still there. So if I tell you where something is, you can go there and access anything you've been given permission to. It just doesn't advertise. It's not a blinking advertisement anymore.
And if you had sloppy change control, theoretically, could you just forget where something's at and maybe lose it forever? Like, I don't even know where it is.
You could. If you're removed from the index, then you won't be able to find it. And then, if somebody doesn't know where it is, they won't be able to find it. It's a temporary solution. And there's a couple temporary solutions. Microsoft has this overreaching temporary solution, which is to go the opposite direction and unindex everything, and then add in up to 100 sites that you would like indexed. And this is for companies that are super worried about this.
Okay.
You can go the other way. That's a temporary fix that Microsoft has allowed or put into place that you can do. So instead of if you don't know where your crown jewels are, then you can go that way. That's a more intrusive way, because now nobody can find anything that you haven't added to that 100 site list.
Interesting.
Yeah.
What else? What other questions were they? What else was on the checklist or things that they were talking about?
Well, I mean, as far as access goes, what else can we do about the access without doing that? Because the first thing people think of is, well, I don't want to unindex everything. Right. And there's a few other solutions. Number one, how about removing access from people who don't need it? Well, that sounds like a lot of work, and it
you
is.
Map down what their function is, what tools they need. You almost have to do an organizational-wide interview.
Yes, at some level.
Or you can start shutting stuff off and see who complains, of course.
You can do that.
The old school IT method of change.
you actually, with a higher license from Microsoft.
Such as?
Like a Microsoft 365 E5.
E5, okay.
Or E5 security added onto a Microsoft E3, you can implement something called access reviews. And an access review is an automated process where I say, well, I have these 50 sites that I'm worried about. And I would like the owner of those sites, there's always an owner, to get a email with a list of all the people who have access to that site, no matter how they have access, and say yay or nay, allow or disallow, approve, disapprove, I forget the wording. But they can go down the list and say, oh no, I forgot that person had access. Deny, 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 deny. So that's an automated process, but of course you get that with a higher level of license. But that's a great way to do it.
And you can do that manually in E3, but you could,
Yeah, manually it's tough. I'd have to tell the owner or whoever, hey, go through the site and figure out who has access. That's a tough thing because you can give someone access to a list or a library. That it won't show up right away if you're just looking at the site. You may have to dig in a little bit deeper. So it's a little more difficult. So these access reviews are pretty handy.
Yeah. And what are the other things that people need to think about and prepare for? Obviously, this thing is deadly potential, so
came out of nowhere.
Yeah.
And really almost. I mean, last year people started talking about, hey, you use the new ChatGPT, Microsoft has one, it wasn't called Copilot at the time. So
I thought for a while that people were misstating autopilot. I'm like, oh, you mean autopilot? No, I think it's called Copilot. I'm like, whatever. So
that's one of the Microsoft naming things.
Everything's a pilot.
Everything is a branded thing.
Yeah.
So now people throw out the word Defender, and that means 8 different things where they think it means one thing. Copilot, same thing. There's actually a few versions of Copilot, actually a bunch of them. But for the general Copilot, if I just say Copilot and I don't say anything else, according to Microsoft, I'm talking about the publicly available Copilot on the internet that you can get to through copilot.microsoft.com or through bing.com. If you go to Bing, the Copilot has a kind of a double ribbon symbol.
Yes, I think I accidentally downloaded that the other day.
You can click on it and you can type in a prompt, and there's the Copilot from Microsoft 365. And the difference is, in the background, there's this big, large language model where all the magic happens. But the difference between the two is where the things you type into a prompt are grounded. What grounding means is, where does it go to get the extra information?
Right.
Large language model has everything in the world that they put into it up to about 2 years ago. Now, it doesn't know anything from then till now. So if I need to give me a good answer, I need to use some more refreshed information. Copilot from Microsoft 365, that can ground itself in my tenant, all the stuff I have access to. Copilot on the internet grounds itself basically in what Bing has indexed on the internet.
Interesting.
The Bing used to be called Bing Chat. So, there's a big difference.
Yeah.
So if someone is given a Copilot for Microsoft 365 license, if they were to go to copilot.microsoft.com, they would actually get a toggle to go to do a work. It says work or web. Work means it's going to ground it in Microsoft 365 Copilot. Web means it's going to ground it on the internet. Microsoft has gone to great lengths to make sure that if you're on the public one, it never grounds itself in your tenant.
Okay.
That's why they have a big switch there.
So this is why a lot of people think they already have Copilot, because it's kind of embedded in their browser a little bit.
It is, and you can see it.
It's not the same thing.
It is not the same thing. Copilot, if you have Copilot in Windows, you'll see the work and the web as well. If you're in Microsoft Edge actually has a sidebar where you can have a document open, and the sidebar you get over to the right, to the left, whatever. Copilot can be over there, answering questions based on the document that you have open in the middle. So there's a lot of weird combinations, and it's confusing.
Yeah,
it really is. So, but in talking about the internet, then we get into, Copilot's just one Gen AI, generative, artificial intelligence, meaning it generates information based on a prompt, whatever words that you type in. There's dozens on the internet. What if I want help with a document? I'm trying to type up a document, or I've already got one typed up. It's this big proposal. It's got a bunch of company proprietary information in it. I don't like how it looks. I don't have a Copilot for 365 license. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to copy that into a chat GPT or something on the internet and let it
I'm
do
gonna
its
upload it to
work.
my Grammarly and then run my ChatGPT add-on to it.
So that's another worry. How do we prevent something like that from happening? And then now we get into data loss prevention and all the tools in Purview that can help us with that. The labeling tools.
And Purview is just a definition quick. What is Purview?
Purview is really a renamed compliance. So Microsoft Compliance Center, it dealt with, and now it's called Purview. So it deals with retention, data governance, basically, retention policies, data loss prevention policies, something called Microsoft Information Protection, which is a way to label documents that the label will stay with them. So you can see how many documents are labeled a certain way. You can even take that and encrypt documents that are labeled a certain way. You can even use that labeling as a condition for DLP policies. So there's a lot of benefit to get out of labeling.
You get that with E3?
You get a lot of functionality with E3. You get more with the Microsoft E5. And Purview is one of those areas where it gets real confusing with the Microsoft labeling, the Microsoft licensing. So
maybe we'll hit that at the end.
Yeah, we could do that.
Yeah. Get into the esoteric.
Exactly. So, we get a lot of questions though about that because Microsoft, one of their solutions, if you're worried about Copilot internally or externally, but a lot internally is, well, you take advantage of Purview Microsoft Information Protection, which is labeling, sensitivity labeling. And at a glance, they don't really tell you how that might help you out. And there's a few ways. DLP, if I label something and say I don't want it leaving the company, great. That would help with sending stuff to generative AI sites. But even labeling stuff internally, one thing that we're recommending if people can create labels is to make an encrypted label, which is just a label that puts rights for users. I can say the executive group can read this document. Wherever that document goes, that's it. The document's encrypted. If I try and access it, the document's got a phone home to the encryption service, the labeling encryption service, see if that user has access, and then send the access to Word or Excel or a web, if they're on the website, and tell that product, here's what access that user has, and then it will decrypt and give them access. Turns out, in order for Copilot to actually read something out of a document, from a SharePoint library or OneDrive, it needs the ability to copy information out of the document. So again, talking about crown jewels, what we can do is create a label that removes that ability. Now the user will have that ability removed as well, but so will Copilot. Now Copilot can't dig into that document, even though it might be aware of it. You cannot dig into the document and use any of that document's information to come up with the results of a prompt. So another tool in the tool bag, but you have to do a little bit of work with labeling, have to understand it. That requires some work ahead of time. Classification, labeling.
Yeah. Are our clients asking for that? Are our clients aware of that at this point?
That specifically, no, they're aware of the fact that Copilot is a danger, and one of the tools that Copilot for 365, and one of the tools that might help is labeling. But labeling by itself is a fairly confusing product. Labels, especially
who labels it, how do they label it, how do you control the standards over labeling, what's the procedure?
Exactly.
Yeah.
There's and even the licensing comes into play here. When you want to manually label, if you want to have users in charge of labeling things, great. You can get by with most labeling for user manually labeling with the Microsoft E3. Any form of automatic labeling, like if I want to point to a SharePoint library and say, I would like everything in that library labeled a certain way.
Yep.
Or I want to find everything in SharePoint that seems to look like a social security number with a person's name next to it, high confidence kind of stuff. I want that to be labeled a certain way. Any form of automatic labeling, then we need the higher Microsoft E5 license or the E5 security compliance or security add-on.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Has that been a driver for people going to E5? Is there a strong enough ROI on that alone? Or?
It has. So yeah, that's a great thing because it can go through and label stuff automatically. In addition to that, though, you get a lot of other benefits. That's if that almost gets you there, then all the other benefits of the Microsoft E5 security focused or purview focused will pull you over the line. And again, most companies right now at least have a Microsoft E3 license. Smaller companies might have a business premium license, and that's kind of a weird hodgepodge.
Yeah.
You get a few of the advanced, for instance, Defender and Purview products, not a lot, but most companies that we deal with, they'll start out with the Microsoft E3. And they're looking at the jump between the E3 and the E5. Well, that's a good chunk of money per user. You can cut that in half and actually get the purview part of it,
Okay.
so that you can do the advanced labeling, the advanced DLP, exact data match. Have.
And when you say advanced, you mean automated or just looking at sites?
Exactly.
Group kind of actions.
Yeah, more than just just the general stuff. With regular DLP, it's easy to do it from the cloud. I can say Exchange, Mailbox. Don't let these kinds of emails leave, or don't let people in SharePoint. Don't let people share stuff that looks like this.
Yeah.
Right? With the advanced one, now we can move that into other products, into Microsoft's Cloud App Security Broker.
What is that?
They call it now Defender, Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps. And Cloud App Security Broker is a standard tool now in the industry meant to extend your security from, like, let's say in Microsoft 365 Office products into third-party SaaS apps like Dropbox, like Box, like Salesforce. What if I don't want people to share something that's in Dropbox with some external party? How am I going to do that? I have to tell Dropbox that somehow. Or what if I want
You have to know that they're using Dropbox to begin with.
That's a key for Cloud App Security Broker, actually. And people get that confused. They're like, well, we'll just turn it on and tell it that we don't want, we want certain things to be kept out of Dropbox, or we want to label stuff in Dropbox. But the Cloud App Security Broker doesn't really do that. You actually have to be in control of everything. You have to own that Dropbox, first of all. You have to own your instance and be an administrator. You can't just have your users randomly going there. And you have to connect Dropbox to Entra ID, first of all.
So you have to know about it, control it.
And control it.
And how often does that happen?
It should be happening a lot more often than it does happen. Most people have a single sign-on from Entra to a service like that. And if that's a great start, because if that's the case, now we're using our accounts, great. Now we can connect it to the Cloud Security Broker and start putting rules out. But, for the random stuff, if I want to block a PC, Windows PC, from this uploading my crown jewels that I've labeled, let's say I've labeled stuff a certain way, I don't want that stuff to go to some sites on the internet, Dropbox.
Yeah. Let's
say that we haven't connected. How do I do that? There actually is a way to do it. Again, with Microsoft, this is something called endpoint DLP. We can, instead of doing the cloud DLP, there's a lot of DLPs. We have the cloud DLP, we have DLP that works with the Cloud App Security Broker, Defender for Cloud Apps, and there's an endpoint DLP. An endpoint DLP creates rules based on the point of view of the device. What's the device doing? Device, let's say, is trying to upload something to some website somewhere. Doesn't matter what account is being used. The browsers are trying to go to a website and trying to paste something or upload something that we have marked as sensitive. We can block that.
Okay.
Requires some work. Edge works like out of the box almost, as you can imagine. The other browsers that we would use, Chrome, Firefox, require a little bit of work. We have to install some extensions on them so that they can play ball with all of this. But you can do things like that. You can also tell endpoint DLP, don't let any sync apps touch that either, because that's different. If I have a Dropbox client on my machine, that would bypass that browser and it would sync it a different way. So we can also tell sync apps, not to touch it. I can also say, just don't let it be anything be copied into the clipboard. Don't let it be put on a USB drive. Don't let it be printed.
Yeah.
So these are all things that you can put on endpoint DLP, and these are your choices for what can be done. Whereas in the cloud, we're just saying, I don't want this to be able to be shared externally from SharePoint. I don't want an attachment to be attached to Exchange that matches this. Those are your basic choices for Office 365. For the endpoint, you get a few more. And again, CASB, you can, even depending on the product and the SaaS APIs, you can do even more.
So we're talking about Copilot and the different security components. What about, MFA? And I hear a lot about zero trust. What's that stuff?
Again,
is it important for this?
Of course. It's important for everything. But again, Copilot has surfaced this in a way that wasn't there before because of the supercharged version of an attacker that will manifest itself if an attacker successfully attacks somebody with a Copilot license, because now they can see everything in an instant. So yeah, MFA authentication, let's call it in general, must be strengthened. Everybody can use some authentication strengthening. So yes, MFA is a beginning. I know my password. I should have something else that proves I am who I say I am. And really, the industry is moving kind of beyond that to make it even more difficult for someone to get in. So all of those things should be on the table. And zero trust is one of those words that just sounds great.
That's why I said
I want zero trust. So zero trust is funny. I mean, it basically means whatever I say it means.
Okay.
But it came from the old school version of work where we had on-premise domains, right? Everybody had the authentication server was sitting there in the building, all the people's machines, everybody's machines were plugged in to that on a network with firewalls, intrusion detection, keeping anything coming in from the outside. So we were pretty safe.
We're behind the firewall, safe and sound.
Behind the firewall, yeah. Doesn't exist anymore. So the word zero trust comes in as kind of like a way to say, hey, those machines that were on your network that you could trust before and all that password, you could pretty much trust that was good. That's not trustable anymore because people
not
are
at all.
Well, they're
zero.
Exactly. We can't trust them. So we don't trust them, and we make people prove extra things, either through MFA or somehow have the device authenticate through something called a compliance policy, which basically means the device is chiming in saying, hey, I'm still here. I've done the magic stuff. I got an antivirus working on me. You're in control of me. Here's how I prove that. So yeah, MFA is super important. And in the Microsoft world, we do that through conditional access policies. Conditional access policies are really the new firewall. That's your gatekeepers into everything. And that brings us back into talking about things like the Dropbox and all these other third-party tools. We don't want people authenticating directly to all of those places. We want all of that authentication to come through Entra, through a single sign-on, for a couple of reasons. Number one, now our access to all those third-party apps is also controlled through conditional access policies. And conditional access is where we get to say, you must MFA, at least, to get into your normal stuff. If something is super important, or if you're an account that has extra privileges, maybe we bump that up and say, well, you're not just going to be able to do a normal MFA. I need you to do an unfishable MFA with like a FIDO key. I'm going to pull my FIDO key on my computer, like something like this. Or you can't use SMS, something that no one should be using anymore. If you're still using it, try and move away from it. Not as easier said than done, but there are ways to do it. You can move away from SMS, especially with things like the FIDO key. There's all sorts of attacks now on the internet that are becoming easier and easier. I just saw an attack the other day, an SMS attack that is becoming prevalent. SMS is very easy to break into. If you're using SMS as your second factor, you're probably going to lose your account eventually. If somebody focuses on you, they can just buy their way onto getting your text messages sent to them. But now what people are doing, a lot of people are enrolling in third-party SMS services. They get a phone number so that they don't have to use their phone, their actual number.
Yep.
They get this other number that works on an app. Well, what if they put that in as their two-factor authentication, that phone number? And what if they don't really secure that account? They don't put MFA on that account. Well, now somebody broke into that account. Now they can get their
They've got the
SMS.
MFA.
It's
They've got the
crazy.
keys to the kingdom.
And the second they get in like that, the first thing they'll try and do is add another MFA method to their Entra account, so now they can persist. And then again, they'll see if you got Copilot. So yes, the strengthening authentication is key. If you can convince everybody to move to a FIDO key, which is considered an unphishable method, Windows Hello is as well, that is the way to go, especially for your administrative accounts and your executive accounts. One of the methods that's a commodity method on the internet right now, meaning the bad guys are selling this as a service. They'll set you up to do this. It's called adversary in the middle, where they send you an email, a phishing email. Looks like an email to reset your password. Okay, I'm lazy or I'm tired. I clicked on it. It's a Microsoft website, and I send my password. It used to be that was just some server they had running. Now they got your password. Well, okay, they got my password, but they didn't get my MFA, so they still can't break into me. Not doing that anymore. Now that server is a proxy server straight back to Microsoft. So you're actually talking to Microsoft. Microsoft sends you an MFA and you answer it. What's the benefit? Well, right after you get the MFA and you prove who you say you are, Microsoft sends you a token, which is a little blob that comes back to your computer that proves you are who you say you are. Don't have to MFA anymore for at least an hour. And that's what you send into Microsoft. Well, that proxy server just stole that. Now that person is you for at least an hour. And they don't need to MFA. So this key, and anything like it, including Windows Hello, prevents that. Because when the token comes back, it must be decrypted by this, which is sitting in my computer. So it doesn't matter if somebody intercepts it. So this is the gold standard right now. If you can't move to it en masse, move to it for your high-profile accounts, your administrative accounts. If you can, do other things like compliance for the computer. Make sure people are sitting at a computer that we own and control. So yes, that's super important now. It's always been super important, but now, again, Copilot's just surfacing all these things. Are you taking care of your information? Well, we've been meaning to do that. Okay, well, now's the time. We're planning to go to that. So let's get a plan together, do some data governance, figure out where the crown jewels are, figure out what information is important to us. Do we want to start labeling stuff? How should we do that? What should the labels be? Let's start out with the important ones first, the crown jewels again, and then we can work our way backwards.
This doesn't apply to Copilot. This applies to, if
everything.
They're using any kind of AI tool, right? Isn't that?
That's true as well. Yeah.
So they kind of, now's the time where people need to pay attention to see whether they're rolling Copilot out or not.
It's a good thing and it's a bad thing.
Yeah.
The bad thing is, oops, time's up. Now we really got to hurry up. But it's a good thing because now we have a really good story to tell as to why we need to implement these things. Why we might have to spend a couple of dollars, in research and maybe consultants to come in and help us do this, maybe hire some more people, spend a little more money on some higher end licenses, depending on what we want to do, to actually do the things that we've always been saying we're going to do. But, there's always other things, other projects, money to be spent elsewhere. Yep. Now, it's not just the Copilot in the tenant for Copilot for 365, but there's all the generative AIs on the internet that people are sending stuff to. So we really have to put a net over our data, especially starting with, again, the very important data.
Yeah. Okay. And so just, this whole Copilot thing, closing thoughts on this, obviously you got to take a look at your baseline and all the, a little bit start over, right? Not over as in overhaul, but just take a fresh look at it.
A review. Yeah. Time for a review for conditional access policies. If you're a Microsoft customer, there's, several
easy things to do.
They are if you know what you're doing.
Okay.
And it's a good opportunity to say, hey, we could actually improve this, or hey, look at all the exclusions for this MFA policy that someone has been putting in over the last year, and we forgot to remove those exclusions. Goodness, we had half the company. In
It's
some
almost
cases,
like just doing an audit of
time to do an
for
audit.
conditional
Exactly.
access and DLP status and
Yeah, it's a great time to do that, to revisit those things that you put in maybe a while back. You've been kind of sort of trying to feed and care for it, but not enough time to deal with it. It's always something you can do tomorrow. Well, today is tomorrow.
yeah.
That's basically it.
Great. Any other thoughts?
That's pretty much it. Take care of those things. If people don't need Copilot for 365 right away, maybe hold off for a bit on it. And it's a great product. Don't get me wrong. It saves productivity people a ton of time. But the interest goes like this on a new product. It's high, and then what are we actually getting out of it? And it dips a little bit. So pick your people wisely to pilot it, the people that are going to actually use it. Now, we see this all the time. We give a dozen people a license or a product to use. The first 2-3 days, they're all over it. Then I look a week later, they haven't touched it in a week. So put some metrics in to get people actually in the game, choose the right people.
Yeah.
So it's a great product, but again, maybe slow roll it just a little bit.
Yeah, and certainly do some sort of baseline security review, just with attention to what the superpowers of Copilot can achieve.
It's a great excuse to do exactly that.
Great, that sounds good. Well, thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.